Last week we heard how Jesus sent the disciples, the 12 apostles, on mission. And it was a fast-paced mission, a whirlwind tour of the surrounding cities. Jesus told them to go, proclaim the kingdom, heal the sick, and cast out the demons. And if the people didn't receive you, shake the dust from your feet, leave, and go to the next town. And Mark, as I said, is the action gospel. Jesus tells us what he's going to do, he goes and does it, and then he moves on. So the disciples in the passage today come back from their mission. They're excited to tell Jesus of their experience. Jesus tells them, come away for a little bit of downtime. And before they could even catch their breath, they look up and the people are following them. I'm sure the disciples may have thought, well, just not now. Can you just give us a break for a little while? Except they didn't. The reaction was that they saw that the crowds hungered very deeply for something. Just, they didn't know what that something was. But Jesus is about to teach them. And we're told Jesus sees the crowds and is moved with pity, with deep human compassion. That's what they needed. And he realized that they were like sheep without a shepherd. They were kingless and leaderless people. And that's the phrase the Bible frequently uses to describe the people of Israel when they were without true leadership, without a faithful king or any king at all. And throughout the Old Testament, the prophets excoriated the leadership of Israel. We see it again and again throughout the Old Testament in Numbers, in Kings. As we heard from the prophet Jeremiah today, we also hear the same from the prophet Ezekiel, who says that they were scattered because there were no shepherds. They became food for all the wild beasts. And at this point in the story, Mark has already told us that Herod was the tetrarch. He was ruling Galilee, and he was probably in his palace on the south side of the Sea of Galilee, carousing with his cronies, winking at young girls. And in the passage immediately before this gospel that we read this morning, he has beheaded John the Baptist. And he's beheaded John because John accused him of being in an unnatural marriage. And Herod's henchmen were all over the place. They were bullies, along with the Roman soldiers. So the people were longing, yearning for good leadership, someone to truly guide them, someone to whom the flock could look towards. And so they saw Jesus and they wondered, is he the king in waiting? Is he the one who will lead us? You know, if you watch the world events, even in just the last few days, you can get that feeling that the people must have had. Leaderless, almost lost, adrift in this world. I have to say that I'm kind of mesmerized by this prison escape in Mexico by the drug dealer called El Chapo. You know, I worked in prisons for a long time, and one of the things that surprises people is that inside prisons are hardened criminals. But outside prison are their co-conspirators, their partners in crime. And El Chapo, as he's called, Joaquin Guzman, the largest drug dealer, biggest drug dealer in the world, has more foot soldiers than the military in Mexico. And so you know everyone who worked in that prison or had anything to do with his incarceration was under threat. And I'm sure they were told, let us build this tunnel. And what a tunnel it was, 1 mile long, ventilated with lights and transportation. I'm surprised they didn't put a coffee bar in the middle so you could. But the people who work in corrections are often under that pressure. And, you know, they were threatened, if you say something, say goodbye to your family. Your children will be kidnapped, your wives will be abused, your house will be burned, or worse. And who could they turn to? The government of Mexico? They already knew they can't protect them. And here's the thing that's bothersome is that the Mexican government could have extradited this man to the United States. We could have put him in one of our supermax prisons. We have 2 of them. I've been to them. They're pretty impressive. and the people in Mexico who were just doing their job, trying to make a living for their families, would not have been in such danger. I'm sure the Mexican people today are thinking, does anybody really care? Do we have any leadership that can solve this horrible problem of the drug cartels? Or even in our own country this week, hearing about the shootings in Chattanooga, I have to admit, and I'm ashamed of this, my reaction was, oh, here we go again. And I thought that's exactly what terrorism does. It numbs us. And I think our leadership, in some weird way, wants us to just get used to it. This is going to happen. It won't be big like 9/11, but here or there now and then, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I was reading the story of one mother of one of the Marines who was killed. She heard about it. She was watching the news, and as she was watching the news, she heard a knock on her door, and she looked up, and it was 2 Marines. And she knew why they were there. She needs deep human compassion, the kind of compassion that Jesus gives. Our world is always in need of good, solid leadership. And so we might say, well, what can we do? What can we do? I did hear one good word, and it was counter-indoctrination. In other words, we have to indoctrinate, just as the terrorists are indoctrinated, we have to counter that with a different message. Now, we as Christians call that evangelization, preaching the gospel, offering people the hope, the forgiveness, the reconciliation that Jesus brings. Paul in his letter to the Romans tells us that God gives authority to the rulers of this world for our welfare, to help keep good order and to maintain the peace. Well, we know throughout history, sometimes leaders do that. Sometimes they act more in their own self-interest than ours. And so what do we do? Well, the New Testament is very clear that Jesus is the shepherd, the leader who guides us to his kingdom. In fact, the New Testament states very clearly that history reached its climax, its fulfillment, when Jesus walked out of the tomb. Not some other period, not in the 21st century when human beings think they can master nature and create utopia, if only everyone would listen. And if they don't listen, well, then they'll just have to have it imposed on them. Paul tells us in the letter to the Ephesians that Jesus is our peace, who reconciles the various factions of the human race, forming one person where there was previously 2. Like 2 rivers that eventually merge, Jesus forms the divided human family into one family. Now, that might seem pie in the sky when you look around and you see how many people are at each other's throats, how that we seem adrift, looking for direction, and so often we grasp onto the wrong things to find that direction, to find that meaning, someone who will really lead us. And the truth is, we know every leader eventually either disappoints or is inadequate. But Paul tells us that God brought together first the Jew and the Gentile through Jesus, forming one new river, that is the church. And it's the church that moves through history, bringing together people from all groups and lands. For Paul, the merger is ordered and comes about through the cross of Jesus. And the hostility that had existed between Jew and Gentile has been killed on the church, on the cross. The point for Paul in Ephesians was God's plan was to create a single new humanity in the place of the divided humanity. And when we think of that great vision, we obviously have a lot of work to do to make that a reality. But that's why it's important to remember that we, the church, are the river, moving along, inviting others to be reconciled with God through Christ. Maybe it's too hard for us to see much movement at this point in history. And sometimes when you look at a river, it seems like it's standing still. But we know there is a current underneath. You can't see the current, you can only see the effects of the current. But it's there. And the current pushes the water along. And that's how it is with life in the Spirit. It's moving us, the church, where we need to go, in the direction that God wants us to go. The question, of course, for every individual is that we have to ask ourselves, are we swimming upstream against the current, or are we with the current to the place Jesus is shepherding us to? Are we with the church, or are we against it? Are we fighting surrender to Christ, or are we surrendering? Jesus is the one true shepherd by which the scattered people of God finally find their way home.
Like what you just heard? Visit Our Lady of Mount Carmel's social media pages for more faith-filled content. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Read the OLMC Tempe blog. Your Catholic community is online. Let's stay connected.